decisions that aren't going to be sticking to those principles because we're going to be moved emotionally. So the principle is we want to save lives. Okay, so in halacha that's called a mitzvah of pikuach nefesh. We have a mitzvah to save lives. So if I could do more mitzvahs of pikuach nefesh, so that's better. If I have the option of doing two mitzvahs versus one mitzvah, so choose two, don't choose one. If I could do more pikuach nefesh, I could do more mitzvahs. So then I should opt to do more mitzvahs than fewer mitzvahs. So what seems intuitive, at least, is we should try to save the most lives as possible, right? That should be our goal, to save as many people as possible. And we need to create systems to make sure that we are maximizing the numbers of lives saved. This is interesting to discuss in another context. How do we deal with that in a non-pandemic time? But certainly in a pandemic, well, our goal is going to be to try to maximize the number of people we could save. So how do we do that? Okay, how are we going to figure that out? 10 people came in. I can only treat 7 of them. I only have 7 machines. So I have to distribute them somehow. Now, I want to save all 10. I just can't. So how does that mean to maximize the number of people saved? The maximum is 7. Okay, great. So, great, Rabbi, we'll save 7. But which 7? How are we going to choose? How are we going to make that decision? And so the bioethic guidelines and halacha, the poskim who've talked about this have described that, look, without getting into a lot of the details, because they're not relevant for us in terms of the actual diagnosis, but we know, you can read about it in the news. There are some patients who come in who are really, 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 really sick, leave aside the details, who have a very low chance of survival. And there are some patients who have a much higher chance of survival, meaning even if we treat them, we do everything in our power. So let's say there's someone who only has a 20% chance of survival. Even if we do everything, we give them everything we got, based on our experience, based on our knowledge, based on our cumulative communal knowledge, global knowledge right now, statistically speaking, this person only has a 20% chance of survival, even if we do everything. And person B may have an 80% chance of survival. Why? A whole variety of factors as they relate to this pandemic. Age is a factor in as much as chances of survival drop with with higher age. So certainly in the 90s, people in their 80s and their 90s, they are, not because we're discriminating against them, it's just the fact that they're less likely to survive. People with comorbidities, people with diabetes and hypertension and cardiac disease and pre-existing respiratory diseases, people with comorbidities. The details are not relevant for us right now. We know, though, generally speaking, there are people who are more likely to survive and there are people who are less likely to survive. And we're not talking, oh, he's 51%, she's 52%. Now we're playing games because these are rough estimates. These are ballpark figures. So 80% versus 20%, you want to be off by 5-10% here or there, we're still talking about a significant difference. So we know, and certainly now in June, with a lot more experience, and I say we, I mean the global community, because we're all really learning from each other in this, but the global community is aware of who has a higher chance of success and who has lower. It doesn't mean it's zero, but we're talking about in terms of chances of success, and we assume that we will try to prioritize those who have the higher chance of success. Now, the reason for that is that, well, if the mitzvah is to save as many lives as possible, I have a greater chance of saving more lives if I save the people who have a greater chance of surviving, right? If I can perform the mitzvah, and so presumably the mitzvah is to save a life, so if this person has an 80% chance of having their life saved, and this person has a 20% chance of having their life saved, so it's leaving the emotion out of it. But if there's an 80% chance of doing a mitzvah, or 20% chance of doing a mitzvah, I should opt for the 80% chance of doing the mitzvah. No? That's, I'm not a betting man, but if I had a gamble on it, I would gamble on the 80% as opposed to the 20% to if I want to know if I'm going to get the check in Shamayim for having done the mitzvah or not. Now, the challenge is that, well, let's think about it for a moment. If we give, let's say, patient A, who has an 80% chance of success, so we give him the ventilator. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen to this patient? They're not going to snap back like this, even if they survive. It's going to be a slow process, right? It's not like, oh, boom, you gave them a magic potion, they're now good, go home. No, they're going to go to the ICU and they're going to have intensive treatment. And again, there's still a 20% chance that it's not going to work. So we're going to work really, really hard, put in a lot of effort to get these people out. And what if you gave it to the person with a 20% chance and he doesn't survive? So what does that look like? It usually doesn't mean that they drop dead on the spot. It might. But that's usually not what it means. It usually means that they'll be put on the ventilator. They may survive an hour, hours, days, weeks. They may not make it. But it's not sudden like this either. The same way the first guy isn't getting healed and cured immediately, this person isn't going to, not survive. It's possible, but often they'll survive a little bit. So we can describe that in halacha. Halacha, the Gemara already describes these two different outcomes. The outcome of saving a person to survival is called chaye olam, and the outcome of survival for only a shortened period of time is called chaye sha'a. Now, chaye olam literally translated means living forever, but it doesn't mean living forever. And chaye sha'a means living for a few hours, which doesn't mean living for a few hours. These are phrases, right? One refers to surviving the illness, and we'll describe it later a little bit more. And one means only a short-term survival. But when it comes to the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh, it's kind of interesting. Because when it comes to the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh, the mitzvah, I perform the mitzvah whether I can give someone chaye olam or whether I can give somebody chaye shah. Now this comes up la halacha. Let's say we know that there's a halacha that says that if someone's life needs to be saved on Shabbos, you violate Shabbos. No questions asked. You violate Shabbos. Even if I'm not sure that their life needs to be saved, they're clutching their chest like this. It could be a heart attack. It could be heartburn. If it's a heart attack, they need to be rushed to the hospital. If it's heartburn, they need Tums. They need Tums. I have Tums in my medicine cabinet. I don't need to rush them to the hospital. And they're just going to give them Tums. How do I know what it is? I don't even know. Still, we rush them to the hospital. Why? Because that's called Safek Pikuach Nefesh. We violate Shabbos for Pikuach Nefesh. No questions asked. We violate Shabbos. We'll eat Chametz for Pesach. We'll eat on Yom Kippur. We'll do pretty much everything in the Torah, except for the big three cardinal sins: idolatry, adultery, and murder, for Pikuach Nefesh. And as the Biur Halacha writes, the Mishnah Brura, in Hilchos Shabbos, he says that the same is true for Chaye Shah. Meaning, if you can help someone, you say, look, they're 119 and 364 days old. And, they don't have much left. So you're going to violate Shabbos to save them? What are you going to gain? A day? 12 hours? Yeah. The halacha is you're Chaye Shah. Chaye Shah, you're allowed to violate Shabbos for Chaye Shah. You're going to give him an extra hour or two, an extra day or two, you violate Shabbos. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you always have to do everything no matter what. That's a conversation for another time. But certainly we see from here that helping someone achieve Chaye Shah is a fulfillment of the mitzvah of Pikuach Nefesh. That's clear. Now, again, whether you have to do everything all the time, different question completely. So, okay, fine. So what's the challenge now? Well, the challenge is, we said, look, I have two patients. Let's say I have one ventilator. It's easier for me to think about than 10 and 7. The math is simpler. Patient A has an 80% chance, patient B has a 20% chance. So let's give it to patient A because he has an 80% chance because I'll fulfill the mitzvah of Pikuach Nefesh. But that's not true. I'll also fulfill the mitzvah of Pikuach Nefesh with the 20% person. It's also the mitzvah of Pikuach Nefesh, right? Because I've also grant him the ability to have Chaye Shah. So if I'm just saying, hey, we'll choose the one that helps you perform the mitzvah better, I will argue, you fulfill the mitzvah in both of them? You got to check in both of them. In fact, I'll go even further. I will actually contend that there is absolutely no mitzvah to save a life. I've been saying there is a mitzvah to save a life, and we talk about it like that. But the mitzvah of Pikuach Nefesh is not actually to save someone's life. Sounds a little bit crazy, but I don't think it is. Because think about it for a moment. We could do everything in our power to save someone's life. And let's say we don't succeed. Is it because we did something wrong? That might be. But let's assume we did everything right. The outcome is not in our control. I don't control the outcome. That's all in the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He controls the outcome. So how could he command me to do a mitzvah that I don't control the outcome? I could do everything I want. I could do everything right. And in the end of the day, the person doesn't make it. So I didn't do the mitzvah? So hold that thought for a moment, because there's another mitzvah in the Torah that we often talk about in the same way that we talk about this mitzvah. The first mitzvah in the Torah. The first mitzvah, the chinuch writes in the Torah, is the mitzvah of pru or vu, having children. So is the mitzvah to have children? Because that's also something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the end controls. We can probably all think of families and couples who aren't able to have children. They're just not able to. Now, there are all sorts of technologies and abilities, Baruch Hashem, medical advancements to help them out. but they're not able to do that. So how could HaKadosh Baruch Hu create a mitzvah where to do X, but I don't control the outcome? I have no idea if it's going to work. So in fact, if you look in the Rambam doesn't say there's a mitzvah to have children. The Rambam says, mitzvah live ol be'ona ha'amura b'Torah ad sheyul banim. You need to do your effort. You need to put in your effort to have children. You need to do whatever you can. The effort that you need, discussion for another time, what that means. But you need to put in the appropriate effort to have children. And that's the goal. The goal is to have the children. So once you've had them, Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, 2 boys, boy and a girl, well, not for now. Once you have whatever number is appropriate, you're no longer obligated to the mitzvah. But the mitzvah is the process, right? The mitzvah isn't the outcome. The outcome is the goal, what we're working towards. But so long as you're doing that which is appropriate and necessary to do, you fulfill the mitzvah. In fact, the Gemara in Shabbos, when it talks about that in Shamayim, they're going to ask 6 questions when we get to Shamayim. The first 6 questions, one, the question about children is not, did you have children? Maral points out it's asakta bepiria verivia. Were you osake in piria verivia? I could have asked, did you have children? Because that's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to be osake in piria verivia, to do what you can, whatever is necessary and appropriate, to have children. So too with the mitzvah pikuach nefesh. The mitzvah pikuach nefesh is not necessarily to save a life, because I don't control that outcome. The mitzvah pikuach nefesh is to do whatever I can to save that life. In fact, when the Shulchan Aruch writes, he has these strange cases from in the Gemara. For whatever reason, in the Gemara, the classic therapy, medical therapy, is figs. There seems to be an obsession in the Gemara with figs. Agrogeres, you need a fig. So there's a patient who's dying, and the doctor says, he needs a fig to live. Whatever. Let's imagine that such a thing could be true. The figs in the Gemara accomplish a lot of different things. So the fig is going to save his life. So it's Shabbos. So where do you get a fig? On the tree. You send me to a tree, I'm not going to find the fig. But presumably in that kind of culture, in that kind of society, you had fig trees. So there are 10 of us in the room. The doctor says, the man needs a fig to live. We're like, wow, okay. Mitzvah pikuach nefesh, violate Shabbos. We all go, find the fig tree, climb to the top. I'm assuming you have to climb a fig tree. I have no idea. You climb to the top of the fig tree. We all pick a fig. It's a malacha of kotzer. You're not allowed to pick fruit on Shabbos. You're not allowed to. It's one of the 39 malachos. True. But this is a mitzvah pikuach nefesh. You're allowed to pick fruit to save someone's life. Never had a thought about picking fruit. We usually try. Okay, you can pick a piece of fruit to save someone's life. Fine. So now we all rush back to the room with the doctor. Now we're all going to be at different speeds, And so one of us gets there first, and we give the doctor the fig. The man eats the fig. Baruch Hashem. He had his fig. He is now good to go. Baruch Hashem. We saved his life by picking a fig. The other 9 people come huffing and puffing in. Doctor, we have a fig. And the doctor tells them, no, we already have one. You only needed one, and we don't need yours. So thank you. That was really helpful. But practically speaking, the 9 of you, we don't need your figs. What do you do with them? Good question. So there's a Rambam who writes, did the 9 people do something wrong? Did they do something wrong? When you had the 10 people in the room, we all heard the doctor. 10 of us heard the doctor saying he needs a fig. What should we have done? Should we have appointed one person to say, you go find the fig? Or should we all of 10 spread out and go as fast? Whoever can bring it first should get it. So the Rambam says, no, everyone should do the mitzvah. The mitzvah of pikuach nefesh is that each person should try to do the mitzvah. And when the Shulchan Aruch quotes this, he adds in a line, a phrase at the end. He says, not only did they not do anything wrong, yesh lahem sachar tov me'es Hashem. Now, the Shulchan Aruch is not a Musar Sefer. The Shulchan Aruch is a book of yes and no. This you may do, this you may not do, under these circumstances, under those circumstances. It's a little bit dry if you're looking for inspiration. So it can be a little bit dry. Your rule has to be very detailed. But here he's saying, yesh lahem sachar tov me'es Hashem. They get rewarded from Shemayim for this. What does that mean? You know how many check marks you get on your homework check in Shemayim. So what does it mean, yesh lahem sachar tov me'es Hashem? So yesh lahem sachar tov me'es Hashem here means they fulfilled the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh. Why do they get rewarded in Shemayim? Because they did a mitzvah. That's what we get rewarded for. What mitzvah did they do? Person number 7, 8, 9, 10 picked figs that were useless. They did not save anybody's life. They were not necessary. They're probably muktzah. You're not allowed to eat them. So why yesh lahem sachar? Because the mitzvah isn't necessarily to save the person's life. It's to do whatever you can to save that person's life. And person number 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all were doing what they could to save this person's life. They were all in fulfillment of the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh, even though their fig wasn't necessary. And so too, if you have a situation where someone is dying on Shabbos and you drive them to the hospital and it's not successful, they're not able to bring them back, not able to save them. So the person driving do something wrong? If the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh is to save a life, I would argue, then yeah, you didn't save the life. You didn't. Now, ahead of time, should you have done it? You should have done it. That's true. You should have done it because you didn't know. But in retrospect, did you do a mitzvah? If the mitzvah is to save a life, well, you didn't save his life, so you didn't do the mitzvah. But if the mitzvah is to do whatever you can to save someone's life, then this person did whatever they could to save a life. They fulfilled the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh. It's goal-oriented, but it's not judged by the goal. It's judged by the process. So as long as you're doing that which is appropriate and necessary to save that person's life, you fulfilled the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh. So let's go back to our two cases, our two patients. Patient A has an 80% chance of survival, and patient B has a 20% chance of survival. So I made the argument at the beginning, and I said that most poskim and most of the bioethic literature says, well, let's prioritize the patient with the 80% chance of survival because I'll more likely fulfill the mitzvah. So is that true? Well, I'll more likely he'll live, but the mitzvah is fulfilled either way. I fulfill the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh in either direction, right? Even if I give the ventilator to the person with a 20% chance and he lives for a couple hours, so I fulfilled the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh. So how can I make that decision? So the Chazon Ish says he doesn't talk about a pandemic and doesn't talk about ventilators, but he talks about this in another context from one of the most famous Gemaras. Now, I like quoting a famous Gemara. Most people don't know that it's a Gemara in Bava Metzia Samach Beis, but they definitely heard of this Gemara, whether they're aware that it's even in the Gemara. The Gemara in Bava Metzia Samach Beis says, "Shnaim shayim mahalchim b'derech u'v'yad echad kiton shel mayim." Two people are walking in the desert, and one of them has a jug of water. And they're in the desert, and they're dying of thirst. And they're lost, and they don't know where to, and they're not making it to whatever destination to be saved. And now the situation is, if they split the water, so then they both get a drink, but neither of them will have enough energy, water, whatever it is, to make it to safety. If one of them drinks it and doesn't give the other any, so then that one who drinks it will make it and the other one will die. So what do you do? Again, one jug of water. If you split it, so they both get a little bit of water, but they both die. If the first person drinks it himself, he'll make it and the other one will die. And this is in fact a machloket tanaim. Ben Petura says, what do you mean? You have to save, there's a mitzvah to save lives. There's a mitzvah to save lives. You gotta him, you split the water. Split the water. You can't be the cause of his death. If you drink it, you're the cause of his death. You can't cause his death. You're not allowed to do that. Split the water. Rabbi Akiva comes and says, no. Rabbi Akiva says there's a pasuk. The pasuk in the Torah, when it comes to the mitzvah of tzedakah, says, V'chei achicha imach. Right? You have to give tzedakah so that v'chei achicha imach, so that he can live with you. Right? You should allow him to live with you. So Rabbi Akiva says, what do you see from that pasuk? V'chei achicha imach. He should live with you. He says, you see from there's an assumption of chayecha kodmin l'chayei chavarecha. Your life takes precedence, meaning he needs to live with me. That presumes that I'm here, and he lives now. I have to do to him so that he can be here with me. The assumption is that I'm here first. So Rabbi Akiva, who, let's assume for the moment we follow the halacha. It's a little bit unclear. The Rambam doesn't write this, and the Shulchan Aruch doesn't quote this case. But let's assume we follow Rabbi Akiva. Discussion for another time. What does that exactly mean? Why is that true? Meaning, where does that, I said it's a pasuk, but what are they actually arguing about? What does Ben Petura say? What is Ben Petura and Rabbi Akiva actually arguing about? And there are lots of different theories what they're arguing about. Maybe Ben Petura says, well, if you hold back the water, it says if you're killing him. Remember we said you're allowed to violate any issur in the Torah to save a life, except for 3: idolatry, adultery, and murder. Ben Petura may say, well, if you don't give him water, you've effectively passively murdered him. So you're not allowed to do that. Maybe Rabbi Akiva says, you're not murdering him. I mean, you're murdering him. Murdering him. Take a gun, I shoot him. Murdering him? I didn't murder anybody. I didn't go near him. I didn't touch him. I didn't even talk to him. That's not murder. Could be. The Chazon Ish says, no. Let's think about this for a moment. The Chazon Ish says, they're both standing there, and they both have this jug of water. If they both drink the water, what happens? If they both drink the water, then let's say it's a 12-hour walk to the next city. If they both drink the water, they both live for 6 hours. Now, neither of them makes it to the next city, but they both live for 6 hours. If one of them drinks the water, well, he'll live for 12 hours and the other one dies now. So the Chazon Ish says, well, we have halacha categories that fits into. Let's think about it. If we split the water and each person lives for 6 hours, so that's called chaye sha'a, right? That's a short-term life. There's no hope of survival, but that's chaye sha'a. And if one person lives for 12 hours, so 12 hours isn't all that much more than 6, right? But it allows him to get to safety, so he'll live the rest of his life. So he can then have chaye olam. So the Chazon Ish says the machlokas between Ben Petura and Rabbi Akiva is as follows. Ben Petura says, split the water. You know why? Because you'll have chaye sha'a for both people. Both people will gain chaye sha'a. They'll both live for 6 more hours. And that's 2 mitzvos of pikuach nefesh. And Rabbi Akiva says, that's true, but 1 chaye olam is greater than 2 chaye sha'as. You see from here, the Chazon Ish writes, you're allowed to prioritize chaye olam over chaye sha'a. You have a pasuk in the Torah that teaches us that. You're allowed to prioritize chaye olam over chaye sha'a. Now, they're both mitzvahs. Rabbi Akiva is not saying there is no mitzvah of pikuach nefesh with chaye sha'a. Of course, there's a mitzvah of pikuach nefesh with chaye sha'a. The very fact that you're allowed to violate Shabbos for chaye sha'a means that there must be a fulfillment of pikuach nefesh. Rabbi Akiva, though, is saying when it comes down to it, you have to make a choice. You're allowed to choose chaye sha'a over chaye olam. And the question
Dr.
is,
Shabtai,
yes.
Is this related to the idea that a person could potentially, Rav Shechter talks a lot about endangering chaye sha'a for the benefit of chaye olam, right? Is this related to that concept that a person could undergo a surgery
not.
that?
It's a good topic for another question for a completely different year. More meaning that usually when Rabbi Brand, I think, is referring to the question of can I put myself in somewhat danger if I have chai. I think. Sorry, I'm mixing up two questions.
I have
chai sha'a, can I gamble my chai sha'a for chai olam?
Exactly. I have chaye sha'a right now, but I could put myself at risk and potentially gain chaye olam. Where if I didn't have the potential to gain chaye olam, I would never have a heter to put myself at risk. But I can risk my chaye sha'a to gain chaye olam. So it sounds like you're also doing the same thing you're describing, that you are hazarding, you are sacrificing your chaye sha'a and prioritizing your chaye olam.
So the Chazon Ish himself addresses this, I think, in a different point. He says that's true, but that's me. I can risk my own chaye sha'a in order to gain chaye olam. But without this pasuk, I don't know that I can risk your chaye sha'a for me to get chaye olam. That's very different. Meaning, now I'm taking. There's 2 people in this situation. I mean,
you're the doctor looking at these 2 patients.
Yeah,
that's different than somebody forfeiting their own chaye sha'a.
Correct, or even for one patient for himself as opposed to 2. So we have this pasuk, but I'd like to suggest that where it's based on, because it's going to be relevant for the following case. So here, the bioethics guidelines quibble a little bit. So let's say we've managed to prioritize all of our patients. We stratify them by high risk, high chance of survival, medium chance of survival, and low chance of survival. Again, we're not going to play with the numbers exactly because these aren't exact sciences. And we're able to prioritize them. And let's say we have 2 patients they're in the same category. They're both medium chances of survival. So how are we going to choose between them? So one suggestion is, and I'm not advocating this, is that we should save the younger person. Why should we save the younger person? Well, we'll save more years of life, right? If we have someone who's 100 and someone who's 20, so if I save the man who's 100, I'm only gaining 20 years. And if I save the lady who's 20, I'm gaining 100 years. So shouldn't I save the lady, assuming again they both have the same chance of survival? So shouldn't I try to gain more years? So I would suggest in halacha that that's not true. And again, not all the bioethics agrees to this, but it raises an interesting point. But I suggest in halacha that's not true because of the following point. This idea that Rabbi Akiva prioritizes chaye olam over chaye sha'a. Why is that? If they're both, so intuitively I understand, because he said, look, Rabbi, I get it. You're trying to tell me there's a mitzvah of pikuach nefesh by chaye sha'a. That's true. Fine. I buy your argument. There's a mitzvah of pikuach nefesh that if I can grant someone chaye sha'a, I fulfill the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh. And if I can grant someone chaye olam, I also fulfill the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh. But you're going to tell me they're equal? Come on. I can make the halachic argument all I want. I can turn my thumb into a pretzel trying to convince you that they're both mitzvah pikuach nefesh. So they're both equal. And at the end of the day, you'll come to me and say, but yes, but in one, I saved the person's life, and in one, I didn't. You're going to tell me that they're completely equal? I get it. It's the process, not the goal. I understand that. But intuitively, I understand that there's a difference. So I think there is a difference, but not in terms of the mitzvah itself. The difference is, and we have this in halacha. We have sometimes halacha recognized that there are different ways which I could fulfill the very same mitzvah. I haven't been to Chicago for Sukkot, but I imagine that it's not just one standard set of lulav and esrog that you can buy. There are probably different levels of esrogim, right? There's the cheaper ones, the fancier ones, and aside from just getting ripped off on the price, there are different levels of hidur mitzvah. We have this concept of hidur mitzvah. When you buy tefillin, there are simple tefillin, there's fancy tefillin, there's super fancy tefillin. There are levels of tefillin that are unimaginable to most of us in our budgets. But these are levels of hidur mitzvah. There's a mitzvah of hidur mitzvah, to do the mitzvah bihidura in a more enhanced way. Now, in terms of the mitzvah in Shemayim, I'm wearing my simple tefillin, and the guy next to me is wearing a mitzvah. So who got a bigger check by the mitzvah? We both did the mitzvah of tefillin. I get a check for the mitzvah of tefillin. He gets a check for the mitzvah of tefillin. But he did the mitzvah of tefillin, he gets a little bit of an extra. He gets a bonus. But we both did the mitzvah. In terms of the mitzvah itself, we both did it. That's the point of hidur mitzvah. Hidur mitzvah means you fulfill the mitzvah 100%. If you can, why not fulfill in a more enhanced way? If you can. So what does it mean in an enhanced way? Just prettier tefillin? It's just cleaner esrog? No. It means that there are criteria in halacha. When you talk about tefillin, so you could have tefillin, depends on where the leather comes from. Is it a behema? Is it a behema daka or a behema gasa? Is it how's the writing? You can follow the chumrah of the Rash, but there are all sorts of levels, but they're not arbitrary. They're all following halachic categories. Same thing with an esrog. Sometimes with an esrog, they try to rip us off a little bit, admittedly, right? This one's fancier. It looks prettier, but it's not. There are halachic criteria that this is halachically significantly better than this. When it comes to matzah, it's the same question. Most of us, matzah, buy in Costco, it's the same matzah. No. When it comes to matzah, there are also different levels of hidur, and it's not just, it costs more money. So often it's reflected in the price. But you're fulfilling additional, you're fulfilling more shitos, there are additional halachic categories that you are able to fulfill. So you fulfill the basic mitzvah, that's true, but you could do the mitzvah b'hidura with hidur mitzvah. And I would suggest that that's true with the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh. You could do the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh, you're right. Chayisha, Chay Olam, both the same mitzvah of pikuach nefesh. I would argue that when you have the option, so to do either one, so the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh is done bihidura when you can actually save the person, when you accomplish the goal. Again, the mitzvah is to do, but if you accomplish the goal, so then you've accomplished the mitzvah bihidura in the best way. And if you don't accomplish the goal, so you also fulfill the mitzvah. But let's not pretend for a moment that if you work so hard to save someone, it's not the same. You worked hard to save this person's life, it didn't succeed. So you fulfilled absolutely 100% the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh. But wouldn't it have been better if you saved his life? So yeah, because it's a mitzvah bihidura. So why does that matter? I think that matters because when we talk about hidur mitzvah, we're talking about halachic categories. So the halachic categories that exist are chaye olam and chaye sha'ah. Number of years is not a halachic category. Halachic categories are chaye olam and chaye sha'ah. So this is my suggestion. That chaye sha'ah means we can grant this person a little bit more life. Chaye olam, again, literally means living forever. So that's not true. Nobody lives forever. So in terms of the ventilator in the pandemic, what does it mean he gets chaye olam? It means he'll survive coronavirus. He'll survive COVID, right? And he'll go back to whatever his pre-pandemic, his pre-pandemic life expectancy was. Whatever that was. Now that he survived this illness, we anticipate it's an 80% chance of going back to whatever it was before we even got into this business to begin with. That's chaye olam. Chaye olam is restoring his health to what it was before we even started this year. Before we started the pandemic, what was his life expectancy? Chaye olam is returning him to that position. And chaye sha'ah is less than that. And those are the two halacha categories we have to work with. And so if I'm going to do the mitzvah, and I'm going to say that we're going to prioritize chaye olam over chaye sha'ah, because it's hidur mitzvah, so it's only halacha categories. So the number of years is irrelevant. If I have two patients who have equal stratified chances of survival, the number of years that they can anticipate ahead of them, I don't believe should be relevant. I don't think halacha would then, discriminate against the elderly in this case. Age is a factor in terms of survivability. That's true, but not because we're discriminating against older people. It's just because of age is a factor. So age factored in already. So assuming age was already factored in, and they're still in the same category of a stratification, I would argue that you don't choose based on years. So how do you choose? So it has to be something somewhat arbitrary. And poskim talk about doing a go roll. The poskim talking about having other ways to deal with this, but the number of years should not be a factor in that determination.
So the case that you're talking about now is the case where, let's say, you have two patients walk in the door, one's younger, the other one's older. But what about if you have a case where the two patients are in the same boat, or one patient maybe has a little bit better chance of living? That patient walks in the door, the other patient is already on the machine. Can you snatch it out from one person and give it to the next person who has a higher chance of survival?
Excellent question. That's excellent. Fascinating. Definitely, I can't pull that off in the next. I don't know how much longer we have, but maybe another time. But that question was asked also. So there, again, the bioethics literature and the halachic literature might differ there. Can I turn off the ventilator? Can I take someone's already ventilated and they only have 20% chance, like we said, but they're not going to die instantly. They're going to get another week. Can I turn it off from that patient to give it to a patient who walks in with a higher chance? And often what happens, so now we're months into the pandemic, but I remember being in New York City during the swine flu epidemic, where this was an issue, where the concern was, who comes first? What kind of patients show up in the emergency room first? Usually the sickest, and those who have the least chance of surviving. But they come in, I got plenty of ventilators. I got a whole stock room full of ventilators, and I'll give them out. Why not? Why would I hold back? 10 patients come in, I got 10 ventilators, give them all. But on day 2 and 3, you know who starts coming in? The doctors who took care of the patients on day 1, and the EMTs, and the younger people who didn't get quite as sick, but now they're getting sick. But their chances of survival are greater, but I got no ventilator. I have no ventilators left because I gave them all on day 1. So now what do I do? So that's a very challenging issue. Do I hold them back? But I don't even know that these people are coming. That's very challenging. I just wanted to point out leaving that question aside for now, I just wanted to point out 2 caveats that some of these bioethic literature pointed out, and I think are also completely in concert with halacha. Let's say everything's equal. They wanted to prioritize 2 groups of patients. The first are patients who are participating in a clinical trial for a drug for COVID. And the second are healthcare workers. So again, if everything is equal and one patient is participating in a clinical trial to find out if a drug can cure COVID, so then we'll prioritize them, or one of them is a healthcare worker and one not, we should prioritize them as well. And although it seems arbitrary, I think it's completely in concert with halacha. And very briefly, I'll explain why. How much time do we have? 2 minutes. Okay. Well, so let's at least talk about the clinical trial part first.
A few minutes. You'll
Okay.
tackle both. You got a couple minutes.
Sure. There's a Mishnah in Harios that says that talks about these things, which I completely avoided. But the Mishnah in Harios says, look, if you have number of people to save, so Kohen Kodim LeLevi, Levi Kodim LeYisrael, there's a hierarchy. Kohanim, then Levim, then Yisraelim. So me being a Yisrael, that doesn't help me so much. Why are Kohanim and Levim first? But most of the poskim say, Rav Moshe Feinstein says very clearly, we don't really follow. We don't follow. Oh, there's such strict criteria when that would have to be applied. That's practically not true. But there's a Yerushalmi that says, but one exception to that is when there's Rabim Tzrichim Lo. Rabim Tzrichim Lo. So they talk about this, and Rabim Tzrichim Lo means the person is of benefit to the tzibur, to the community as a whole. So let's say there are hostages taken, and I can only save 1 or 2 of them, right? I should probably prioritize the commander, the chief of staff, at the expense of, I can only save 1. Save the commander or the chief of staff or the person in charge. Why? Because Rabim Tzrichim Lo, if we save him, we could save more people. That's the theory. We have this notion of Rabim Tzrichim Lo. If I have to prioritize, I have to save them all. I have to prioritize the one that Rabim Tzrichim Lo. I would like to argue in the next minute and a half that anyone who's participating in the clinical trial, so I don't need them. I need everybody to live. Why do I need this person to live? Because their continued survival or not will enhance my life and everyone else in the global community. because we'll have more information about a drug that can possibly save the rest of us.
Mhm.
So yeah, if there's a patient participating in the clinical trial, it's not Rabbim Tzrichim low. It's not that this person is now going to come back and rally the army and be the best, and do research. But no, I need the information that will glean from his treatment. And not only me, but we all will. And the same thing I think is true of a healthcare worker. It's not because if the healthcare worker gets treated, he'll be back on the front lines next week. That's probably not true. I don't know how many people you know who survived the ICU from COVID. They're not running back anywhere soon, many of them. Many of them are with chronic conditions for a long time. However, why do we prioritize healthcare workers? We prioritize healthcare workers because we ask them as a society to put themselves at risk. We say, look, you go, you take care of people, you put yourselves at risk to save the rest of us. And they do it because it's a calling, it's a mission, and we should be tremendously grateful forever for what they do for us. But we promise them that, hey, if you get sick, I'll take care of you. There's an incentive. How are we going to balance that? If you get sick, there's a ventilator waiting for you. Why? Because otherwise they're going to be hesitant. They're not going to be with the same Mesiras Nefesh to take care of us. So that promise that they know that if should Chas v'Shalom they get sick, there is something to back them up. That's also Rabbim Tzrichim Lo. Because the system needs this in place. We need this incentive in place because we all will get taken care of better. We, meaning the non-medical community, will be taken care of better if the healthcare workers are promised that ventilator. And so, yeah, by giving the ventilator, prioritizing the healthcare worker, we all benefit because all the other healthcare workers will have more Mesiras Nefesh. They'll be more incentivized to take care of us. I apologize for going over the last 2 minutes.
No, it's fantastic. Fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing. We can open it up now if anybody wants to write into the chat any specific questions, or if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask. Feel welcome to
Rabbi
do that.
Shabtai? Rabbi Shabtai?
Yes.
My name is Jerry Parness. I'm calling from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Shalom Aleichem. How are you?
Mhm.
Welcome back to
Rabbi.
Chicago.
How are you?
Okay.
Nice to
Anyway,
see you all.
so I want to step back a couple of seconds.
Sure.
One is that you started out your argument by saying the isuk in pikuach nefesh is what's important because really whether someone survives is not in our hands. But
Okay.
you're asking us to make decisions by I'm sorry, I'm sitting in the dark. I'm
That's
out
okay.
in my backyard.
Enjoy.
Okay, but you're asking us us to make the decision. I'm a physician as well, to make the decision based upon the likelihood of success. The likelihood of success is statistical. It is not guaranteed, right? So Chaye Sha'ah and Chaye Olam is really not in our hands. Unfortunately, we all know that I've taken care of patients who responded fabulously to the treatment. The treatment was so good it killed them. This particularly with cancer patients, this is what you see when you get a tremendous tumor response all at once. So we're doing this statistically. And so what you're saying is that we're allowed to use statistics. Okay, it's not so much the pikuach nefesh that we're involving ourselves in, but we have to use statistics in order to assume not the role of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, but what God allows us to know of the way the world works. That's the only thing that we can do. The other thing that I wanted to say is that your ending argument is the same argument that was originally used to allow fighting for your life on Shabbat with weapons, right? That was that. Okay, so when in the early years of Bnei Israel, their enemies knew to attack them on Shabbat because they wouldn't go out and fight. They couldn't carry their weapons. They couldn't do this. They couldn't do that. And then what happened? And then they said, no, that's crazy. And the halachic decision is that nobody will go out and fight if they couldn't take their weapons back, because then they would reattack. So that's why physicians are allowed, from physicians are allowed to drive to their hospitals on Shabbat and come home. Because if they didn't know that they could come home, they might hesitate in going out. And hesitating at a time of pikuach nefesh would keep them from going out again, which is the same thing that you were talking about with the EMTs. It's the same halachic framework.
It's
And
very similar. Yeah. So
what?
I completely agree with the statistics. I think we are guided. We don't have a choice.
Yeah.
I remember I have a congregant who was very sick with COVID, and I remember having a conversation with his wife about burial plots and how are we going to run a funeral during a pandemic. And this was, so here pretty much things got ramped up after Purim. Purim was on
Mhm.
Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
This conversation happened on Friday, and then Sunday, talking about March. Last Friday, I called him before Shabbos. He's in the rehab facility. Hopefully he's getting out.
Baruch Hashem.
Yeah, we're correct. But we have a responsibility to use the. Again, I'm not saying, I was not comparing 51% to 52% to 53%.
No, even 80%, there's still that 20%.
Oh, correct. No. But when I'm comparing people, I don't want to. When we're using statistics, we have to use them carefully. And I'm not suggesting that I'm the person to make those decisions. Those are clinical decisions being made by clinical people. But I agree completely. And the second thing, that's Rav Moshe Feinstein's argument of allowing physicians to drive back. He's talking about Hatzalah members.
Right.
He's not talking about physicians.
Originally, the original Allah. Yeah.
Right. He's talking about Hatzalah members. And then I'll leave it to Rabbi Brand to deal with what the psak in Chicago is. If Shlomo Zalman Auerbach disagrees, Rav Moshe Feinstein allowed it to Hatzalah members, or Herschel Schechter thinks it's limited to Hatzalah members. But the Hitiru Sofan Mishum Tchilatan,
Right.
I think that's even. I don't even need to. I don't think I need to get there. I think that's a broader. I think even Rav Shlomo Zalman might agree with me, who disagrees with the principle of Rav Moshe Feinstein. But I do see the parallel in terms of the methodology. Thank you. I think that's very clever. Thank you.